Welcome to Write Now Workshop Podcast, where you can write a book and change the world. I'm your host, Kitty Bucholtz, and this is episode 145, One Literary Agent's Take on Publishing, an interview with Sara Megibow, coming to you on Thursday, May 30th, 2019. Now, I do believe I have been talking weather for the last few introductions, and let me just say, I think it's time to stop, right? No more weather. Let's not talk about weather because it's been rather sunny and rather warm for an entire week now. So it's kind of old news, right? Now, as soon as I do this and I stop talking about the weather because sunny and nice and warm is totally like not even news anymore, it will get cold and rainy again next week, and everyone in Skåne will be like, Kitty, stop it. Just thank God for all the nice weather so that we keep on having more. So we'll see. I don't know, but it's super duper nice. And we are going to have a massive bike day. Let's see. Actually, by the time you hear this, it will have been yesterday. So yesterday, which is next week in my future, we're having a massive bike day where everybody at Massive Entertainment is encouraged to ride their bicycle to work. And they're going to have workshops on how to fix things. And obviously, I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm like, I don't know, what would the workshops be on? Something about brakes. I don't know. I get on my bike and I just ride it. So I think I should probably go to some of these workshops, don't you? Anyway, so once again, I do hope that your almost summer or your almost winter are treating you the way that you like them to be. When I am in the Southern Hemisphere, I am really hoping for cool weather so I can wear some of my favorite sweaters, and I'm already starting to think about hot chocolate and fireplaces. So wherever you are, I hope that the weather is like so awesome that it's not even worth talking about anymore. Now, in other news, for those of you who have been following my podcasts and my little bits and pieces and small segments on burnout, there is something that I am going to lead by example, even though it's really, really hard. Okay. There are times when you are recovering from burnout where things are just too much. You have once again somehow managed to get too many balls in the air. They are hitting each other. They are hitting you on the head. They are falling on the ground, and you're trying to throw them back up into the air again. You are possibly noticing that your emotional state is going backwards, which is not good. We need physical health. We need emotional stability and happiness. And sometimes we need to just change things in order to make sure that these important physical and emotional health are in so many ways the cornerstones of how we live the rest of our lives. They're the foundation on which everything else sits. So when those start to be shaky in any way, the first thing that you see is that somebody's coming to an inspected building to see how can they firm up the foundation? How can they make things be safe and firm and well so that the whole building doesn't come tumbling down? Because that is sort of what it feels like when you're in the middle of a terrible bit of burnout, like I was last year. So when you start feeling that the foundation maybe is a little shaky, no matter what it takes, we have got to let some of the balls go for later. This is horrible. It really hurts. There is nothing that I really want to let go of. I really enjoy my job. I love podcasting. I love writing, and I miss writing because the podcasting has a schedule to it that forces me to, because by choice. See, notice the words that we use? Nobody's forcing me to do anything, are they? But if I want to stick to a podcast schedule, there are certain things that need to be done in a certain amount of time that takes. And if it means that I am taking that time away from writing, well, in some ways there is a pie and you can only cut the pieces so many ways before there just aren't any other pieces left. Now I have started mixing way too many analogies and metaphors here. This is what I need to do. I need to let at least one of the balls go for now. Doesn't mean forever. So if you feel like you're juggling too much and there's nothing that you can let go of, it feels like there's nothing you can let go of. Trust me, I understand. I have had tears and frustrated bursts of kind of anger that feel like anger anyway. And I know it's just frustration, trying to figure out how I can keep everything going without stopping anything. I want to keep on doing everything. But you know what? If it's not working, it's not working. And it's not worth your health. It's certainly not worth your mental health. And if you have had experience with burnout, it is absolutely, absolutely not worth going backwards to that place again, right? So, like I said, I don't want to do as I say, not as I do. So I have decided that I'm going to start a summer schedule. So starting next week, which it will be the first week of June, I will not put out a podcast episode, and I will do it every other week thereafter. So the second Thursday in June will be the next podcast episode after this one. And I'll do it every other week for the summer. I will still do the first Sunday of the month Encouraging Words episode because I love that one. And I probably get the most feedback from you about that one as being the one that you love and that is most helpful and hopefully most encouraging to you. So I just wanted to let you know, A, that will be the new schedule for the summer, and B, please look at your life. Or if you have a friend that you worry is struggling with juggling, please talk to them and help them to find something that they can cut at least for a while. It doesn't have to be forever, but it's so important for us to protect our emotional, physical, all the different kinds of health that we have. It's important to protect that as much as we can. And as much as we think that we have no choice about things, there are some choices. Sometimes the choice is I have to keep going the way that I am because of, financial issues, a sick family member, or something like that. But there probably are things that we can do to keep ourselves from getting into that pit again. It's not a good pit, remember? Remember what it felt like? So here I am trying to encourage you by saying I'm going to do this thing, and I think it will be the best thing for right now for my health. And I really, really hope that this is an encouragement to you to look at all the different areas of your life and the health that you're feeling and just asking yourself, is everything going okay? Is there any change that I could make just for a little while maybe, or a permanent change? Did I tell you that I have been going to the gym with my husband? Yeah. 4:30 in the morning, the alarm goes off, and then we go to the gym mostly 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for around an hour to an hour and a half, depending on whether or not I do some running afterwards. Let me just tell you, running after doing a HIIT class that my husband made just for the two of us. There was one point where I was like, I just have to hold on to the sides of the treadmill because I'm really afraid I'm just going to fall off of it from being so tired. But you know what? My body is a little stronger. And so I'm like, all right, I'm seeing a little bit of result. I'm going to keep on going. So, but you notice since I added that in, that was near the 1st of April. It was right after my birthday. Then that means that the only way to not lose sleep, because sleep is super important to me, that other things get cut. So here's hoping that I am balancing things in a good and healthy way and being a good example to you as a person talking about burnout that is not, I just still feel really bad that for years I was teaching that time management class and helping people figure out how they can milk more hours out of the day and realizing that that's how I probably got myself into burnout and thinking, oh my gosh, I need to make up for that. I need to make sure that I am not encouraging people to work so hard that they actually risk their health for it. So there I am. This is my verbal hug to you, my encouragement. So look around, see if there's anything that needs to be changed. In the meantime, this is a great episode. You're just going to love it. Sara is fun and smart and funny and just super nice. If you ever have a chance to meet her at a writer's conference, you should definitely just walk up and say hi. She's just a really nice person. But you know, the thing that I admire about her most is a literary agent. Sorry, I get so excited and then I talk too fast. The thing I admire most about her as a literary agent is that she is on top of her game. She really is interested in all aspects of her business, and she really wants to make sure that she's doing the best job with the people that she's working with the authors that she's choosing to represent. And I have to say that it just makes me super happy to be like, wow, that's the kind of literary agent any of us would want, I would think. So she has got some wonderful advice, regardless of where you are in your career. one of our many, many rabbit trails will probably be quite helpful for you. And definitely, please let other people know about this episode. Tweet it, post it on Facebook or whatever social media that you really like, because I really, really want people to have a sense of what will work best for them and feel a little bit calmer about some of the questions that they just don't know the answer to. Sara does a really good job I think, of helping all of us to be like, okay, just calm down, ask myself, where am I getting this information? And does it even apply to me personally anyway? So without further ado, let us go into the interview with Sara. And please have a fantastic week. Take care of yourself and try to get a little writing done. Today's guest is Sara Megibow. Sara is a literary agent with KT Literary out of Highlands Ranch, Colorado. She has worked in publishing since 2006 and represents New York Times bestselling authors, including Margaret Rogerson, Ronnie Loren, Jason M. Huff, Jalee Johnson, and newly Casey McQuiston. She specializes in launching debut authors and working on long-term career development and profit strategy with them. She is a graduate of Northwestern University with degrees in women's studies, gender studies, and American history. Always LGBTQ plus friendly. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here.
It is so good to have you. You and I have been talking about doing this for almost a year.
It's so funny. I remember we met at the Romance Writers National Convention last summer here in Denver.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And we connected because I had just been to Sweden. And love it so much. My husband's band is going back again this coming November for their 4th tour of Sweden. And for sure, it is our favorite place in the world.
Sweet. Well, you and I are going to have fika together.
I have. Look at this. I even pulled this out for you.
Oh,
it's a postcard. We were there on Semla Day. And
nice.
Yes, and so we have fika. We have fika placemats in our house and mugs, and it was so much fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, I am definitely going to have to find out his band tour dates and cities.
Okay. But talk about books. We'll talk about music.
That's right. Yeah, because everybody's going to want to know 1,000 questions. So I thought maybe we kind of start a little bit at the beginning, a little bit of your beginning if you want. And also sometimes when I'm giving people advice or ideas, directions, and where they may find their answers, I'm like, okay, well, I actually started in the 90s and things have changed a lot in the last 30 years. Yeah. So why don't you just kind of take it and go in the direction that you think sounds, that will help people to kind of come to the beginning of the rest of our questions.
Well, it's so funny because when you emailed me and said I started writing in the 90s, a thing that people say is, oh my gosh, how do you survive? How do you work in publishing with all the recent change? And I think publishing has been changing for decades.
Yeah.
Change didn't start with the evolution of the ebook. And I was just on the internet a second ago looking up if it was Mr. Simon or Mr. Schuster, and I couldn't find it quickly enough. I'm sorry. But back in the 20s, one of the two of them introduced the returns model, and that was a huge moment of market disruption. And then, like you were saying, well, then there was the 70s with the mass market paperback. That was market disruption. And then in the 90s, it was the big box store. So when you were starting writing, that was just when our big box stores, what were they? Barnes & Noble and Borders were launching in the 90s, and was all sort of on the back of Harry Potter success. And then, of course, in whatever it was, 2010, with the introduction to the market of the iPad, all of a sudden, ebooks became more easily consumable. It wasn't that we had an ebook revolution, it's that we had a device revolution.
Yeah.
And so, it was so funny hearing you say, starting in the 90s. And I always think back to the 20s and into disruption. But those are the things that I tend to watch. And people say, well, oh my gosh, is publishing changing? Yeah, but it's changing all the time. And that's, we just go with the flow.
Yeah. Which is good because I can't remember. See, now, if I had thought that we might be talking a little bit of history, I would have tried to remember some of my dates. But I remember finding some information on the beginning of popular publishing in London in the 1800s.
Oh, sure.
Wow. those people were really smart. They had as many amazing ideas as we do today.
Absolutely. And I think, something that when we get worried about P&L statements and publicity campaigns and deadlines and release dates and advances and option clauses and et cetera, what we forget to think about and acknowledge is even way back in the 1800s, et cetera, we have readers. Look at all these fabulous readers that love reading books. And, ultimately, fundamentally, they're the wind beneath our wings. It is constant. It's growing and it's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I'm not, I've never really thought that publishing was a zero-sum game. Is there any part of it that you think does work that way? Any part that people should be worried that like, oh, if I help, my friend beside me, then one of us isn't going to get what we want out of this.
That's not been my experience.
Yeah.
I think what is tough to explain to groups of people would be expectations. Because one of my areas of expertise is in crafting a profit strategy for an individual author. But when I stand up in front of a group of people, it's very important for me to encourage writers to vet information for their own situation. So you were saying, if two people are standing next to each other and one person gets something, will the other person not get something? That's not my experience. However, if someone stands in front of a group of authors and says, the one thing to do to make a whole bunch of money is X, that's not true.
Yeah.
Typically. And so, when I speak to, like you had mentioned Ronnie Loren, and I have a copy of one of Ronnie's books right here. Oh. When I speak to Ronnie has 10 or 15 books for sale. Ronnie's very prolific. She studies the market so carefully. She works on her craft so carefully. Her books are New York Times and USA Today bestselling books. We have deals in Germany. We have deals, in audiobook. Strategy for Ronnie is different than, say, strategy for Casey, whom you very kindly mentioned. Thank you. Casey's book launched yesterday on the New York Times and USA Today bestseller list, so we're still riding that high.
Wow.
But strategy for Ronnie and strategy for Casey are two very different things. And so when you say, is it a zero-sum game? No, I don't think so. However, I do think that it can be difficult for me as an agent to portray publishing in a way that satisfies questions for a mass group of people. I feel very confident about it one-on-one with my clients, but sometimes I feel like I say something and I think in the back of my mind, oh, that's a gross overgeneralization. How can I be saying that?
Yeah. All right. So that's one thing we'll just make really clear right now, one more time. A lot of what you and I are going to talk about over the next few minutes may be, in some ways, gross overgeneralization because you're talking to a whole lot of people right now.
Right, exactly. Well, and I appreciate, that you said, I'm thinking about London in the 1800s. And of course, the experience of readers and writers in London in the 1800s would be very different than the experience of readers and writers in, say, Florida in the 1800s or readers and writers in, say, Sweden in the 1800s.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I hadn't even really thought about that, but of course it would be.
Of course it would be.
Oh,
right. Thank you.
Yeah. And actually, sorry?
No, I was just going to say, those are all the things that I think about and talk about. And
Yeah. Now, I know that you go to a lot of writers' conferences, and I don't know if I've ever asked you if you've been to ones outside the United States, but I've lived in Australia, New Zealand, and Sweden now, in addition to the U.S. And what's really been interesting to me is the number of people who they read a certain way, and that's the way they read. So, and it also changes. So when I moved to Australia in 2005, end of 2005, almost no one that I knew had ever read a book digitally in any format. Mm-hmm. It was just paper. Mm-hmm. It was just a matter of whether or not you like paperback or hardcover.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, 5 years later, when I moved away and moved back, there was a whole lot more digital. But then here in Sweden, the bookstores to me seem big and healthy. I don't know what their P&L statements are like, but there is a bookstore, at least one in every mall, plus a science fiction bookstore, a comic bookstore, and people here seem to be very interested in reading, and they seem to be very interested in reading paper, but equally happy to, maybe not equally, but willing to read digitally as well. So it's a different location, and I found it to be, a different um, eh, market expectation, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a pretty astute observation, frankly. What is the name of your big science fiction bookstore in Stockholm? Because I've been there.
Oh, okay. I don't know about Stockholm. I've
Oh
only
my
been there a
God.
couple of days. Do I need to go here?
It is, first of all, it's amazing. Second of all, I spent way too much money. And third of all, I spent money on print books that I had to then put in a suitcase and ship home. I mean, and I work in publishing. I get boxes of books from publishers all the time, and I still spend thousands of dollars a year on print books. Ridiculous, but it was beautiful. My son bought like 3 or 4 manga books for the travel, and I bought, my own clients were in the bookstore, which was such a thrill. And to see, like, there were some beautiful, not first edition, but European editions of the Harry Potter books and hardcover, and the Stockholm Sci-Fi Fantasy Bookstore was amazing.
Oh my goodness!
Just because I've been there, and you're right. Even walking up and down this, where were we? We were in the street in the old town of Stockholm, and there was another bookstore. I was thinking, wow, that's really robust. I study analytics pretty carefully, so I can, again, if we accept a gross overgeneralization, I can share some of the analytics I know about print and digital. I will also say that what I've been seeing in the past 2 years, especially for romance novels and especially for science fiction fantasy novels, is a huge increase in people reading audiobooks. So what I know is that in 2005, like you were saying, and this is probably pretty US-based data, so take this with a grain of salt. If you were in Australia, or if some of your listeners are in Sweden or London or wherever, this is probably US-based data. 2005, we had primarily a print market. You said whether it was hardcover, whether it was mass market, people just chose which format to read, but they read it in print. And then, like I said, it wasn't the ebook that was the revolution. It was the device that created the revolution. First, we had iPads, And as soon as people started getting iPads, they started consuming ebooks because it was convenient. And in some cases, cheaper. Not always, but there was a big boom, particularly in romance, for those very, very cheap 99-cent ebooks. And people, would get their iPad maybe for a holiday or birthday or whatever, and wake up the next morning hungover in their pajamas and just auto-click on those 99-cent ebooks. And that created a lot of market disruption in whatever it was, 2009, 2010, 2011. And again, not because of the ebook, but because of the device. And then shortly after the iPad, there was, of course, the Kindle. And those two things, what we saw is that the ebook consumption, again, in the US, went from under 1% to 20% of the market by, wait a minute, I have to remember, by dollar.
Okay.
By dollar. I'm going to check on that because it's very, very different units in dollars. In about 2 years, it went from under 1% to 20% of the market in about 2 years. That's huge market disruption.
Yeah.
Since then, it has been creeping backwards. So, what you said is people seem very happy in Sweden to be reading in print, and that has proven to be true according to the numbers.
Okay.
So, what happened was we had a huge explosion, and then it's been creeping backwards. However, if we break that data down further by genre, it's very striking. So, for example, you and I met at a romance writers convention, and if we look at the entire ecosystem of publishing, that would include picture books, middle grade novels, young adult novels, romance novels, science fiction fantasy novels, literary novels, commercial novels, the 15th, printing of The Hobbit, self-help, cookbooks. If we look at that entire ecosystem, right now, ebook consumption is about 18%. But if we break it down and we look, for example, at middle grade novels, ebook consumption is under 2%. If we look at romance novels, ebook consumption can be up to 70%. So the ebook boom really, really, really affected romance and barely affected, say, middle grade novels. Now, I don't represent literary fiction, so I can't speak to that piece of data, but I follow my own genres pretty carefully. And a big breakout, what we might consider, like Jason Huff, he wrote his debut book, The Darwin Elevator, launched on the New York Times bestseller list, and he's science fiction. His ebook numbers might be 50% ebook, which is very, very, very high for science fiction, but a standard science fiction novel probably is being consumed at about 22% ebook. So I look at those numbers very, very carefully. But what you're saying, I think, and from my perspective, we have just so many readers, and the generation that we might call millennials are people who grew up with Harry Potter, who grew up with authors making money, who grew up with books being popular, books being cool, a robust and enthusiastic young adult section for them to read from, books being turned into movies, books being turned into theme parks. So we're riding this huge wave of excitement based on Harry Potter for this entire generation of readers, which positively influences everyone.
Yeah.
But back to your point about formats, you're right. Now people read hardcover, or maybe they read mass market paperback or trade paperback, or they consume it in an ebook. And we've seen a huge bump in audiobook.
Yeah.
And those are the things that I follow carefully, so that when I offer representation to a new author, I can say, oh, I just did it hasn't been announced yet, but I just did a deal for a debut middle grade author. When I spoke with this person offering representation, I said, the strategy for making money for you is going to be primarily in print. We're looking for librarian support. We're looking for independent bookstore support. We're looking for trade reviewers to really get behind this book and tell school librarians and teachers why this book should be read on curriculum. And the ebook strategy for a middle grade debut is going to be minimal.
Yeah.
Conversely, like with Casey's book, which is a queer romance, we wanted a very strong ebook strategy, and our wonderful, wonderful publisher, Macmillan, did that for us. So that's a lot of information. I've talked for a while. What does that bring for you, and what kinds of things do you hear in the market or heard at the Romance Writers Convention last year or are curious about?
Yeah. It's interesting because I got into chick lit right as chick lit was like, we're here and we're gone.
Yep, sure.
Yep. So I ended up self-publishing mostly just because it was just really bad timing. Which I think happens, there's an ebb and flow. I see most things in business as an ebb and flow. And would you agree that that's probably true in publishing?
I love that phrase. Yes.
Okay, good. So my contacts and everybody that I knew and all the things that I knew about were all 100% traditional publishing up until about 2005 or 6. Then I started hearing things about self-publishing, but didn't really know that much about it. And then ended up self-publishing in 2011. Uh-huh. So since 2011, now it's been, 8 years of listening to, I am a avid listener of Mark Dawson's Self-Publishing Formula podcast. And awesome. I'm sorry, he just changed the name of the show, Self-Publishing Show.
Awesome.
And Joanna Penn's The Creative Pen podcast.
Yep.
Love them both. And the thing is that they're just really intelligent, creative, positive people. And I like that.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things that I hear from them, I'm thinking, what, honestly, that would be good advice or good information to know for somebody who's traditionally or hybrid or self-published.
Absolutely. And I think those are two reputable and exciting people. And like you said, positive people to listen to. Absolutely.
Yeah, because the people who are saying the sky is falling, they may be enjoying that conversation, but I'm not sure how helpful it is for the rest of the people listening.
I would imagine we could find that in any industry, a small percentage of people saying the sky is falling.
Yeah.
I've never had that experience in publishing. I have to say that since 2006, I've worked with talented, enthusiastic, passionate, experienced people. And that's my authors, of course, editors, publicists, sales directors, bookstores, book buyers, librarians, reviewers, everything, bloggers. I work with really, really positive people. So I guess, you could say the sky is falling and have a glass of wine. And
yeah. And it's funny, the reason why I think that it's probably true in every industry is that just recently I've been doing some research that has to do with global warming, climate change, all sorts of biodiversity problem issues. And it's really interesting. There's a lot of very intelligent, highly educated people who know what they're talking about, who are the sky is falling. Yeah. And some of them have a really... I read the first chapter or two of a New York Times bestseller that I was just like, what? This guy has a passive-aggressive negative attitude underlying everything he says, and I am not going to enjoy this book, so I just stopped reading it, even though apparently the entire rest of the world is loved this book according to the statistics. But
So did everybody.
right, yeah. So whether the world is ending or not, whether we are or aren't going to see more major changes in publishing, the fact is that here we are today, and there are things that we can do to improve our writing and our writing careers. And one of the things that we can do is find out what publishing professionals with experience like you can tell us about what we can do. So I have a couple of questions written down, mostly trying to keep track of things that I think probably people would ask.
Okay.
So I have several, and maybe we'll just kind of see how much time we have to get through 4 or 5, and feel free to go off on tangents because...
When I do panels at conferences, I frequently say, okay, now it's time for a lightning round.
Oh, there we go.
I could do that.
Let's do it. All right. So one thing that I know that people want to ask, and I think that they understand the least amount, is how a literary agent works with traditionally pubbed people, hybrid authors, and some people may or may not know what hybrid authors are. And if you really are sure that you're going to self-publish, is there anything that you should be aware of having to do with literary agents?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so I think going back to what you and I were speaking about just a few minutes ago from a lightning round, that it's very important for each individual person listening to this conversation to vet information for their own situation. Yeah. So for example, I've been working in publishing since 2006, and you've been working in publishing since 1990s. A person who's listening to podcasts on self-publishing who is a debut is going to have very, very different analytical data that's relevant to them than you or I will.
Yeah.
So these are the 4 things that I would tell a person to vet before listening to any piece of information. Where are you in your publishing career? Are you a debut? Are you published with 14 books on the shelf, whether that's digital or print, like Ronnie Loren? Do you have 1 book out, like Casey McQuiston? Or where specifically are you? Then the second thing is, in what genre of book do you write? So if somebody writes middle grade and they want to self-publish, the bad news is that it's going to be a really tough battle because so few middle grade novels are consumed electronically. Third thing is, what is your personality? I have clients who love the team approach, write a book, hand the book to their publisher, and they don't worry. The publicity is taken care of, the packaging is taken care of, the uploading is taken care of, the distribution into the bookstores is taken care of, the reviews are taken care of. I have clients that prefer to have more control over their property. And for a client who prefers more control over their property, that author may thrive in the self-publishing environment where it is like owning a business. And we have control over pricing and covers and release dates. So the third question is, what is the personality? And then the fourth question is really, how quickly does an author write? Right. It has been true, although this data is changing, it has been true that electronic books have been, in the past several years, consumed more quickly, perhaps, than print, especially in the romance genre. And again, we're all nodding our heads. This is a gross overgeneralization. Yeah. And so authors who are churning out 2 to 3 books per year, in the past couple of years, there is some data showing that those authors have been making more money. However, I think that's changing. And there are authors that just simply do not write that quickly. And so for authors that do not write that quickly, or perhaps do not write in romance, traditional publishing may have more pros than self-publishing. And I will also say that if one gets 10 literary agents in the room, they are going to get 11 different answers to that question. So I'm only answering for myself. But in general, if one is looking at traditional publishing versus self-publishing, it's those 4 things. Where are you in your career? In what genre do you write? What is your personality? And how quickly do you write?
It's perfect. I love it. You're good at lightning round. All right, let's do another. So hybrid authors, that's somebody who has books that are traditionally published and some that are self-published. What do those authors look like to a literary agent? And that's going to be an overgeneralization. Or what do they look like to you?
So again, this is answering for me, not for the other literary agents out there. A hybrid author is a person who is uniquely suited to writing quickly. And again, this is not a trait that everyone has. Or what I've seen is someone says, oh, I'm going to write 3 books a year. And they write 3 books that first year, and they write 3 books the second year, and they write 1 book the following year, and then they write 0 books, and then they write 1 book, and then they write 3 books, and then they write 0 books. And that's more true, and that's more common. So a hybrid author, I think by default, what you're asking is somebody comes to me in the what we call the query slush pile, or the submissions pile, and says, I have 4 books that are self-published, and I have a new series that I'm starting and that I'd like to pursue a traditional publishing deal with. And it's these 3 books, and it sounds like this. But meanwhile, I'd like to continue self-publishing. And again, that's a really, really rare trait. Let me see if I can hold on one second.
Yeah.
I work with Elle Penelope. Elle Penelope's Song of Blood and Stone was originally self-published, huge breakout success. And this author went on to sign a 4-book deal with Macmillan that I helped with. And meanwhile, we're working on other books for the young adult market, for the romance market, etc. And this is an author who writes very quickly. So that's sort of what it looks like is hybrid publishing today, in my experience, is somewhat predicated upon an author who writes quickly, and probably in romance. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's a good answer. Yeah.
There's a lot of caveats. Like if somebody comes to me and says, I have 10 ideas and I'm looking for an agent, that is not a hybrid publisher. Right. That is somebody who we're looking for a book deal for book number 1, and we'll deal with the other 9 later.
Yeah. Yeah. Hybrid, definitely traditionally published and self-published. Yeah. Okay, good. Now here's a submissions question.
Ooh, okay.
This one's an easy one for you though. Okay. If someone submits to you and you say no, I try not to use the word reject too often. I try to couch it in other words.
Pass,
you say no, not right now. Pass. Yeah. Can they submit, this is a longer multi-part question, can they submit a different story to you? What about a different agent at your agency? I noticed that like yours, there's at least 2 different people who cover some of the same genres. Mm-hmm. And do you think that your answers will be moderately true for other literary agencies?
So my answers will not be at all true for the other literary agencies.
Okay.
If an author is looking for a partnership with a literary agent in order to get a traditional publishing deal, then the first thing that author needs to do is make sure their manuscript is complete. And that's true for every literary agent if you're writing fiction. If you're writing nonfiction, it's different. I don't represent nonfiction, so let's set that aside. The book has to be complete. And then the second thing is the author absolutely positively must know in what genre they have written. And the way that I describe this is, imagine walking into a bookstore and there's an aisle that says romance, and there's an aisle that says young adult, there's an aisle that says science fiction fantasy, there's an aisle that says cookbook, there's an aisle that perhaps says literary fiction. Which shelf is your book going on? Okay. Now, if the author can concretely say, I've written a romance novel, then that author is looking for literary agents that represent romance novels. And there's a couple great places online to do that. There's one called Manuscript Wishlist.
Okay.
There's one called agentquery.com. And then now here's to answer your question about, are my rules the same as other agents' rules? Unfortunately, no. After an author gets a list of all the agents potentially that they want to submit to, the author has to spend time going to each and every agent's website. And that's time consuming and it's difficult. If you have a list of 50 agents we want to submit to, there's 50 different submission guidelines.
Yeah.
So that's part of the process. It's just as much part of the process as finishing the book.
Right.
I would also encourage people to vet their literary agent to make sure that they are legitimate. And we can do that at a place called AAR Online, which is the Association for Authors Representatives, or Google the SFWA website, which is called Writers Beware. And then we go and we read the submission guidelines and we follow them. So for me personally, I like what you say about it's not a rejection. So, in fact, I just signed a new client last week who has written 10 books and has submitted each and every one of them to me. And I have passed on 9 of them. And on the 10th, I offered representation. So yes, apps. And I didn't know that when I offered to this person. He was telling me the story as I was offering representation and talking about my style. But it is absolutely okay that if book number 1 gets passed, that the author completes another book and submits again for me.
Excellent. Okay. And at your agency, if you pass and there's another agent there who also works in the same genre, then should they submit to a different agent at the same agency?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
What's, again, you said, if it's in the same genre.
Yeah. Because I've talked to some agents and they're like, once we see the manuscript, if we're even remotely interested, it gets passed around to whoever also works in that genre enough for us to, I can't think of which one it was, but it's one of the bigger ones.
Yeah.
And they're like, if one of us says no on this manuscript, all of us are saying no on that manuscript. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, we don't necessarily do it that way.
Okay.
I get between 20 and 25,000 submissions a year. Yeah.
Oh my
and
gosh.
I'm going to sign between 3 and 4 clients out of that.
Yeah.
So I know my process pretty well, and it's pretty streamlined at this point.
Yeah.
I love my colleagues so much. And so I think that if I love something, I'm going to offer representation to it. And if I don't love something, it's not like I'm going to say, I didn't love this, but you might want to spend your time doing it, because they've got their own submissions to go through.
Right.
That's again, a generalization.
Yeah.
We tend to work pretty closely and talk about things that we're reading. But I'm the only agent at the agency that does romance novels. So.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah.
There you go.
All right. Let's see. What about, so actually a friend of mine I was like, hey, I'm talking to an agent tonight. Do you have any questions? And she was like, okay, what if I get a rejection with feedback? Do I reply, or am I supposed to just be like, it's a gift, please don't bother me because I said no?
Oh, that's a great question.
Because it's not a revise and resubmit.
Right. It's just I didn't, or here's an idea. I will only speak for myself to this.
Okay.
It's fine if somebody replies. I stay very, very on top of my submissions. So if somebody takes the time to say, thanks so much for your thoughts or something, then I will probably write back and say, my pleasure, best wishes to you. I try really hard this is such a controversial issue, so I'll be careful, but I try really hard not to provide feedback, because there's a lot of reasons. One is, if I were to say to somebody, for example, I think your heroine should be stronger, have more agency, then I'm afraid that author's going to go back with an eye towards revision to make the heroine have more agency, and then come back and say, great, I did what you said, will you read it again? When really, if I had editorial feedback, I'd offer representation and give the author the opportunity to revise with my help.
Right.
The other reason is that there's more and more writers posting our rejections on closed door chat loops.
Oh.
And I feel uncomfortable about that because I might have said something to be encouraging, and the nuance of that communication may not come through on a Facebook chat group or something like that. Yeah. So my passes tend to be, thank you so much for submitting this. I'm unfortunately going to pass on reading the full manuscript, or pass on offering representation, and I wish you the best.
Yeah.
So I try really hard not to give any feedback, kind of for those reasons. And if somebody writes back and says, oh, can you give me feedback? I'll write back and say, I'm so sorry. I don't tend to offer critiques on sample pages. And that's, it also keeps the process streamlined. I find that if people can hear back from me in 2 weeks rather than 2 months, that's beneficial, even if I don't provide feedback.
Yeah. And 20,000.
Yeah.
20,000. How could you possibly?
Yeah.
1% would still be too many.
Well, like you talked about at the beginning, which I thought was a really good point, is when I offer representation to somebody, it's because in my head, I know I have a plan that I can present to this person for how they can make money.
Yeah.
And so I want to love the book, and I also want to have a plan for making money on the book. And if those two boxes aren't checked, it's not a rejection, it's just a pass.
Right. I love it. I love the way you think. It's so business, but also with you have such a great smile and personality, and yet you're totally business. I'm like, perfect combination.
I'm 9 out of 10 on socially awkward. So, I try. I goof a lot. I mess it up a lot.
You know what, though? It's hard. The social media world that we've created, I think, has made it really hard for people to just relax and be themselves and not be looking for things that aren't there.
Yeah.
But
Hope.
yeah. Okay, now you kind of touched on a question that I am going to rework into a broader and hopefully more helpful question. And then we'll see if we have any other kind of like rabbit trails that we want to go off on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so because lots of authors, ones that you represent and hundreds that you've met that you're not representing, that we can be a very neurotic bunch, as so many creative people can be. And sometimes we get stuck on the tiniest of details, like, is it okay that I reply with a thank you for reading my work and getting back to me? I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great day. And I know people who have really gotten like, I don't know, like what if it ruins my chances? They're like, stop emailing me. And I've heard some agents say it would be great if people would just like keep that thank you to themselves so that my inbox isn't overwhelmed. So I know it is a question that has as many answers as agents. But when it comes to neuroses and getting caught in the details, let's look at it from that angle. What are your thoughts on that?
I keep my client list as small as possible so that I can tailor my style to each individual author. Wow. Some are neurotic, some are extroverted, some are introverted, some are analytical. Everybody's different. Everybody needs a different style. I will say that compared to the music industry, publishing is fluffy bunnies and rainbows.
Right.
And I live with an entertainer at home. And so I am well aware, well, at least I try to tailor my agenting style to be as communicative as possible, because I feel like when I communicate proactively, then I can reduce some of the nerves. I can't reduce all of it. I can't change publishing. It's always going to be opaque. It's always going to be ever-changing. It's always going to be unpredictable. But I can communicate. And that's the tool I have in my toolbox to at least help or try to help.
So maybe people who are submitting don't have an agent yet, don't have that kind of feeling of, well, honestly, there is a certain amount of safety and security being like, okay, here I am. This is where I'm supposed to be. But if they're still looking for that place, I guess I'm looking for your advice on how they can calm down and not worry about the things that are not the big things. Because the next thing I'd like to talk about are, what are the big things? What are the things that wow you, or the things that are like an immediate no? So I'm kind of moving in that direction.
I think the thing that keeps me grounded is I walk into a bookstore or a library.
Nice.
Honestly, if somebody is feeling caught up in the minutia, if they have access nearby to a bookstore or a library, take a cup of tea, take a cup of coffee, hide a flask of wine in your pocket, and go walk up and down the aisles, because all those people were at one point a query letter. We're an agent in a bookstore. I mean, 99% of the books in there have literary agents, have gone through the query process.
Yeah. That is lovely. I love that idea.
Yeah.
So go be surrounded by people who were once feeling like you and know that you will get through it.
Yes. Read. Enjoy it. Touch the book. And if we are not nearby a bookstore, because not everybody is, pop open your Google and scroll around at like Powell's. Powell's is an independent bookstore in Pacific Northwest.
Oregon? Yeah.
Yeah. And just the homepage, look at what they're talking about, or go to School Library Journal and see what the School Library Journal, or go to your kid's Scholastic Book Fair or your neighbor's school's Scholastic Book Fair and walk up and down the aisles.
I love Scholastic. It was like the thing that had me reading my whole young life.
Well, and you mentioned at the beginning, Jalee Johnson, whose book, The Mark of the Dragonfly, hands down, I mean, hundreds of thousands of copies of The Mark of the Dragonfly through Scholastic Book Fair.
Wow.
I know I have that one around here.
Oh, yeah. We must see this cover.
Yeah, right?
For anyone who's not watching on YouTube, you might want to just look at, oh, wow, these gorgeous.
Gorgeous. But it's called The Mark of the Dragonfly. And that was a huge Scholastic Book Fair success.
Wow. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so let's move into, what are the things that, this is just your opinion, what you're looking for in writers and books, and maybe even as a reader. What are the things that wow you, the things that make you think, this is a possibility, I might call them, or whatever?
a succinct pitch, and a unique voice. So, for example, I have a debut author that just launched last month, called, her name is Juno Rushton. And this book is a romantic thriller. So it's 10 degrees scarier than a romantic suspense.
Ooh, nice.
Juno pitched this as Jason Bourne-esque romantic thriller. Like, done. I want to read more.
Yeah, me too.
It was a visceral, short, succinct, clear pitch. And the book is called Every Last Breath. Book number 2 comes out in August or September this year. We have almost 100 reviews on Amazon already, and this book has only been on the shelves for about 3 weeks. People are ravenous for the sequel. And honestly, it was just that. It's a Jason Bourne-esque romantic thriller. So the pitch hooked me right away. And then, of course, I read pages, and Juno has mastered her craft. And so I know, like, remember I said I have 2 boxes, I have to love it and I have to know how to make money on it. So I checked the box marked, I loved it. And the next box was, how do I make money on it? Okay, so romantic thriller. So I do a deep dive into data, what I know about mass market paperback and ebooks and audiobooks in this subgenre. And I go check. And then I think about subrights. And this book has an outstanding audiobook. And, we're working on translation deals and Hollywood deals. There's some Hollywood interest already. And so I knew those things up front. And so when I offered representation to Juno, I said, here's how I think we're going to make money on this.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm looking for. You mentioned Margaret Rogerson, who is a New York Times bestseller also. Same thing. Wow. This is a book. The book is called An Enchantment of Ravens. And it launched on the New York Times bestseller list. And it's about a young woman who falls in love with a fairy prince, but for that is condemned to death and is given the choice of drinking from the immortal well to be with him or leaving him. But if she drinks from the immortal well, then she's going to lose basically her humanity. And it's essentially about a young woman learning how to love without losing herself. Wow. And when I thought about that thematically, what kinds of books do we want to give to young readers? Thematically, that's a good one.
Yeah.
People really got into that. And Casey's book that launched yesterday, this is voice and pitch. It's imagining 2019 in a world in which the current president is not the current president, but the president is actually a woman, and her biracial son falls in love with the Prince of Wales. So it is a queer romantic comedy. It is hilarious. I made a little sticky note on the manuscript that said, Sarah, this is the bacchanalia of books. And so that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Of the 25,000 queries I read, probably asked to read maybe 30, maybe 20 manuscripts a year.
Wow.
And so it's very clear to me, a well-written query letter accurately represents what's in the book.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for pitch and voice.
Nice. Wow. Excellent.
Again, I can't speak for all agents. Everybody does it differently.
Yeah.
Writers can go to a couple blog posts to see some really well-written queries. One is called Writer's Digest Successful Queries.
Okay.
One is called Evil Editor.
Okay, right. I've heard of that one.
Query Shark.
Okay. Excellent. Well, that probably would give some advice to the second half of the question, which I feel is kind of a moot point now. What are things that, how do I say it? Not just make you say no, but things that you see as being problems that authors haven't conquered yet when they're trying to query?
That step 2 that I mentioned before, an author doesn't accurately know what genre they've written in. That's a pretty basic one, but you know what? People are still learning. So knowing one's genre inside and out is very beneficial from getting from point A to point B. 2 is I frequently see an author trying too hard to explain what is going on in the book. And when the book is really, really solid, it has a clarity to it that is more easily expressed quickly. And so I think, again, a really well-written query letter is an accurate representation of the publishability of a novel. I see that as one correlation. And sometimes I see submissions that aren't clear at all. So maybe it's not just that a person is just talking and talking and talking, but the pitch itself doesn't have any sort of form or clarity or punch to it. And again, these are my slush pile is not filled with junk. I think that's a common misconception. It's filled with good books and really good books and really, really good books. But it's that much more competitive.
Right.
This industry is even more competitive than really, really good books. It's 25,000 submissions to get three clients. And of those 3 clients, I watch my numbers very carefully. I have about a 75% sales ratio. So out of 4 clients, 3 people are going to get a book deal. And of those 3 people, not everybody launches on the New York Times bestseller. It's a very, 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 very competitive business. So really, really good isn't clear and polished yet enough.
Yeah.
But it's, again, to reiterate, there's not junk in my slush pile. That's not what this is.
That's excellent. Wow, that's really that's got to be encouraging for people listening. If you're listening and you're not hearing that, your work is not necessarily junk just because someone says I'm not buying this or representing you today.
So true. And the 2 things a person can do are keep writing and keep reading.
Yeah. Excellent. And it sounds like, there's an awful lot of writers who I think part of it is psychological, but also it is really hard to write 100,000 words into a pitch or a synopsis. Mm-hmm. But it seems like some really great advice that you have said in a roundabout way is if you can't make something really clear, then look at your story again and see whether or not maybe there's elements in the story that you could rework to make the story clearer.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
You think?
That if the pitch isn't clear, it's not the query letter that's struggling, it's the manuscript. And again, not that it's junk, that it needs more polish. It needs to be more clear.
This is just such great advice. I'm so glad to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, wow. I love the way you talk too. It really appeals to me. I like somebody to just come out and say, this is what I think, and this is the research that I've done, and this is my work experience. So that's where all this information is coming from. Your results may vary with other people.
Right. Exactly. No, I'm surrounded by really, really, really good people, and it's amazing. I really think the world of this industry. I really do. It's hard. It's competitive.
Yeah.
But it's readers, it's books, it's bookstores, it's libraries. How awesome is that?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Oh, okay. Listen, I know that you, in fact, do have an awful lot of work to do. You've got a new New York Times bestseller. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So let's go into the how do you like readers to submit to you?
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up.
I'm sorry, listeners.
No. It's so something I wanted to mention is that I don't do Facebook anymore. However, I do have a pretty active Twitter account. And if we've gone through this chat, and somebody says, oh, I have a question, I answer professional questions on Twitter as my time allows. And my Twitter handle is at Sara Megibow. SaraMegibow. So know that as long as I'm not slammed with phone calls from Hollywood, which I will be today, I answer questions on Twitter. Okay, now, if a person wants to submit, please, I read all the submissions myself. My turnaround time is currently somewhere between 5 and 14 days.
Wow.
For queries. And the book has to be finished. The book has to be never itself previously published. Mm-hmm. The book has to be solidly in one of the genres I represent, which are romance, absolutely any subgenre, science fiction fantasy for the adult market, like Jason Huff, mm-hmm. young adult novels, absolutely all subgenre, middle grade novels, absolutely all subgenre. If it's one of those, then my query email address is SaraQuery, SaraQuery, at ktliterary.com. K like kite, T like taco, literary.com. And our website is ktliterary.com for submission guidelines, clients, and etc.
Excellent.
And all you need is a pitch and the first 3 pages of the manuscript in the body of the email.
Okay, we'll just say that again. Not first 3 chapters, a pitch and the first 3 pages in the body, no attachments.
Correct. All
beautiful.
Is on the website, ktliterary.com.
Excellent.
Yes.
This has been such great fun.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. in and to speak with everybody and to hear your thoughts, especially, being so many books into it that you are, that's so successful. Hugely congratulations to that, because
Thank you.
it's discipline and it's talent and it's hard work. And, 30 years later, we've still got to like this industry.
I know, right? You're in the right place when time keeps going by and you're like, nope, still happy.
Oh my gosh, so true. So true.
Oh, great. Sara, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm sure people are so excited to hear from you. And I really hope everybody, retweet this episode, pass it on to your friends. This is information that people want and don't always know how to get. So thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm so glad we connected at the Romance Writers Convention last year. Happy writing to you. Happy reading to you. And all my best to all the listeners and watchers.